Today we are doing a 100,000 mile review of my Honda Pilot. Now I just said 100,000 miles, but this Honda Pilot actually has close to 110,000 miles on it. Over those 110,000 miles, it has had quite a few issues that I want to talk about in today's video. But before I talk about the issues that I've had with the Honda Pilot, I do want to say that I have felt that it was at least worth what I paid for it. I purchased this Honda Pilot brand new in 2019, and so I am the original owner. I don't actually personally drive it, my wife drives it, but I am responsible for all of its maintenance. And in those 5 years, I've done all of the standard recommended maintenance. I've changed most of the fluids myself because some of the prices they charge at the Honda dealership are just ridiculous in my opinion for those services. But I've also had a few services that over the last few years have cost me thousands of dollars to keep this thing running properly. One of the maintenance items that I personally do not do myself for this Honda Pilot is the oil changes. I have done 2 oil changes myself when I had a really good deal on an oil and filter kit for like 30 bucks a couple of years ago. But for the most part, I get the oil changed at Walmart and I get the tires rotated at Walmart, because at Walmart you can get essentially a lifetime rotation deal for like 10 bucks a tire. And when you go in, you get your oil change, you get your tires rotated, and you only pay for the oil change after that first rotation. Doing the math on that, that's about 16 to 18 oil changes at about $75 a piece. So that runs anywhere from $1,000 to $1,200 for all the oil changes that I've done in the vehicle so far. Now, one service on this vehicle that I absolutely do myself every time that it's required is the transmission fluid drain and fill. And I have had to do it at least 10 times over the last 5 years. So the problem is that the transmission fluid in this vehicle is very susceptible to any kind of wear, tear, dust, debris, anything like that. So as soon as this fluid starts to show any signs of deterioration, the transmission will start to shudder a little bit. So if that's a problem that you've had with your Honda Pilot recently, I strongly recommend that you go ahead and change that transmission fluid. Now, I do want to tell you a story about the transmission fluid that happened over this summer. So I went from about 90,000 miles to 110,000 miles in the last 8 months. And that sounds like a lot of mileage, but I do live back in the woods and I do a lot of country road driving. So at some point in the summer this year, we took a trip down to Florida, down to Disneyland. And while we were there, sure enough, the transmission started to shudder again. This was at about 99,000 miles. So I did a little research online and I got an amazing deal on a 10-quart Honda transmission fluid drain and fill at a Honda dealership. I was a little skeptical at first that I would not get the 10 quarts because the quarts of transmission fluid cost $5 or $6 at least for the dealership, and they cost you about $10 alone if you buy them yourselves. So to get that Honda service for, in this case at that Honda dealership, for $180, I was very skeptical that they wouldn't give us the 10 quarts of fluid. And I believe I was correct. You see, I told my wife that I was skeptical about that deal on that transmission fluid, but I had to go ahead and get it done, because as soon as you start to feel that shudder in that transmission, you need to change the fluid immediately or it can cause permanent damage. So we went ahead, we paid the money, we got the fluid done. Well, just about 300 miles ago, the shudder started again. So I did another drain and fill of the transmission fluid, and that corrected the problem. The reason that I'm skeptical that I didn't get the 10 quarts of fluid from that dealership is normally I get 10 to 15,000 miles per single drain and fill, and a few times I did do 2 or 3 drain and fills at the same time, giving me a much more extended range. But in this case, that 10-quart drain and fill from that Honda dealership didn't even last me 10,000 miles before I had to drain and fill the transmission again. Now, the next service that I've done to the vehicle just about every 20,000 miles is drain and fill the differential on the back of this all-wheel drive model of Honda Pilot. It hasn't been super expensive. It costs about $15 per quart, so 30 bucks to do that, 30 bucks every 20,000 miles, and I did it at 100,000 miles. So again, not very expensive, but it is something that I would consider standard maintenance on an all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive vehicle to have to change that rear differential fluid. Now, something I found extremely surprising is I am still on the original set of brakes. Like I said before, I do a lot of highway driving, or my wife does a lot of highway driving in this vehicle. So when she's out making her daily runs, she really only hits the brakes when she gets to her destination, or if someone pulls out in front of her, or other random things. But other than that, there's not really a lot of stop and go driving. On some of those trips, we do get a little bit of stop and go driving, but for the most part, this is a highway driven vehicle. So I would say at least 90% of the driving, or even about 90,000 of those miles, have been strictly highway miles. If you know anything about Hondas, you know that most of the Hondas from this generation have something called a timing belt. And surprisingly, I've been following my maintenance minder, but my maintenance minder has not shown up with the cue for me to replace the timing belt yet. That would be an A4 code in the Honda maintenance minder. I'm a little skeptical that at some point my timing belt, I'm at 109,000 miles right now, but if I just let that go and never replace it, will it eventually snap? I have seen a few Hondas on the side of the road with snap timing belts, and right now, as far as I'm concerned, it's a gamble as to whether or not I'm gonna pay the money up front to replace the timing belt, water pump, oil seals, everything inside of that cover so that nothing will fail. Hopefully nothing will fail in the next 50 to 100,000 miles, or gamble that it won't snap and just destroy the interference engine that this Honda has. You see, the Honda Pilot gets just a little better gas mileage than its competitors, and one of the reasons that it gets a little bit better of gas mileage is that it has that timing belt. And although my opinion isn't really that important, I do believe that a timing chain would have made this vehicle a much better deal. Because now at only 109,000 miles, on the back of my head, I have to worry about doing that $2,000 timing belt replacement, or doing it myself if I want to spend a weekend tearing apart the engine. And if I don't do it, I have to worry about that potentially catastrophic engine failure anytime I'm on the road. So the next thing that really bothered me about this Honda Pilot is at around 40,000 miles, I started to get a few engine codes. And every time I would get them, I would reset the codes. They would go away for a few thousand miles. But once I got to the end of that warranty, something started to occur with the engine where it would essentially go into limp mode. And again, this was at the worst time possible, so I was not able to do the maintenance that this vehicle required. And my wife brought it into the dealership and had to get all 6 of the fuel injectors replaced. And you might be thinking that fuel injectors aren't a super expensive job, maybe like $100 per injector, which already adds up to $600. But if you're not doing it yourself, the labor on that ended up being about $1,000 as well. So total, we ended up paying about $1,200 out of the door for that job because they gave us a little bit of a discount upon checking out. However, if I had noticed this, or if I had paid a little better attention to some of the things that were going on online, I would have noticed that the engine codes that I was getting led directly to those fuel injectors needing to be replaced, and I would have had it done under warranty. So although that's on me, I still feel like it was kind of a waste of my money, and no vehicle, no Honda, no Toyota should have fuel injector failures before about 100,000 miles. So something that I felt like I really got a decent amount of wear out of has been the tires. I am at 109,000 miles, and this is my 3rd set of tires. My first set was the OEM set, of course. At about 30,000 miles, I replaced those with some Falcon Wild Peaks. And then at about 80,000 miles, I put on these Toyo Tire open country, essentially off-road snow mud capable tires. Each set of tire replacements did cost me a little over $1,300, so that's $2,600 in tire replacements alone. But compared to what I would get on other vehicles like my minivan, getting 40,000 to 50,000 miles out of a set of tires is actually not bad in my opinion. Another interesting problem that I've recently encountered with this Honda Pilot is that it's been really hot the last few months, and on 3 occasions, the AC would shut off. And the AC would specifically shut off when it was at an idle, maybe sitting somewhere in a parking lot in traffic. And then as soon as you started to move, the AC would kick back on. And the other day I went to check the antifreeze, and because it's a Honda, I don't really check the antifreeze frequently. But I did have to add 1 quart of Honda antifreeze to top it off. And I suspect that the engine was possibly overheating, causing the HVAC system to want to shut down to reduce the amount of heat on the engine. And then as I started to move, the motion from the water pump would cycle enough fluid to keep the engine from overheating. So I would say that was probably slightly low on fluid. And now I'm worried that possibly, you know, my wife driving this vehicle has even maybe started to put in the signs of head gasket damage or even head damage. Because if you do run an engine like this hot, especially with all of the aluminum components, you can cause some pretty serious damage to that engine. However, since I topped off the antifreeze, I have not had any problems. The temperature gauge stays at a pretty solid 200 degrees Fahrenheit, so I'm not too worried about it having caused long-term damage. I absolutely love the visibility that these LED headlights provide when I'm driving. However, this was my first vehicle with LED headlights, and one thing I noticed when I got the vehicle or first started driving it is that drivers coming my direction would always flash their high beams at me, thinking that I had my high beams on as well. And I went ahead and bought a screwdriver, which to adjust the headlights on the Honda Pilot, you need something like a 14-inch flathead screwdriver to rotate that adjustment knob. So I got that screwdriver and I adjusted the headlights down so that I would not blind oncoming traffic. However, what I didn't realize was that by adjusting the headlights down, they have such a laser beam headlight effect that it actually would make it harder for me to see. So my 2 options for these lights are to run them low so I don't bother oncoming traffic, or run them at their normal position where I bother oncoming traffic but I can see like I'm supposed to. And obviously it's 2024, so LED headlights are much more normal nowadays, and I don't get that flash as much as I used to. So maybe there's a bigger discussion to be had about the value of LED headlights, the visibility that they create, versus the nuisance that they make for other drivers. Now, I've been walking around this Honda Pilot kind of complaining about some of the maintenance and things like that that have had to do with the vehicle. But one thing that surprised me with the vehicle is the quality of the components inside of the vehicle. Now, this vehicle did come with a leather interior. It has leather seats. It also has this leather steering wheel. This one does not have a heated steering wheel, but it does have heated seats. So in 109,000 miles, essentially nothing inside of the vehicle has gone wrong, except that the infotainment on this vehicle is absolute garbage. This thing has been in the dealership several times, especially when it was under its warranty, to get the sound corrected. This thing has a system inside of it which is essentially like a fiber optic cable that connects to the speakers. And as the weather starts to get cold, those fiber optic cables will start to lose their connectivity. And so anytime in the winter that I hit a random bump, the speakers will go in and out on the system. In addition to that, this Honda infotainment system will shut off randomly. It will lose connectivity with itself, so it'll go into dark screen mode. I've had all kinds of problems with it. And the funny thing is, there was a class action lawsuit against Honda about these infotainment systems, and what I got out of it was a 2-year free extension of the Sirius XM radio, which is funny because I couldn't actually use the radio that much, and so it's not even worth it to have the XM radio. And in addition to that, Honda never really discovered a complete fix for the problems with this infotainment system. Now, besides the infotainment system, like I said, the interior of the vehicle has been actually very good. In addition to that, the all-wheel drive system, since I've maintained it properly over the last 100,000 miles, works very good as well. And in some cases, it works better than my Jeep Gladiator works, because it's all-wheel drive. It's always in that state of operation, whereas the Jeep Gladiator, when it's not in all-wheel drive mode, is in rear-wheel drive mode, which doesn't necessarily have the best traction characteristics. So when driving in snowy conditions or anything like rain, any of those kind of more treacherous conditions, the Honda Pilot actually handles very well. So in terms of being a family vehicle, Honda Pilot is actually not a bad vehicle. And given all of the gripes that I've discussed so far in this video, one thing I can tell you is the Honda Pilot has not left me stranded yet. And so if you found this video helpful, let me know what kind of Honda Pilot you have, and let me know what kind of issues you've had with your Honda Pilot.